Alrighty. Hello, everyone. I appreciate you spending your lunch hour with us today. This is going to be a webinar on an introduction to project management. My name is Molly Yanus, and I'm the founder and I'm a project manager here at Echo Consulting. So for today, please don't hesitate to unmute yourself, engage, ask questions, pause. We'll also have some time at the end today for questions. But if you have a question as we're going, don't hesitate to reach out. Melissa, also from Echo Consulting, will be monitoring the chat. So if you prefer to send your question in via chat, that is also more than okay. So we're going to start off with what is a project. A project is a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. One of the big things that we say here at Echo Consulting is that everyone is a project manager. We believe that everyone is and can be a great project manager. What we do want to clarify is what is the difference between a project and operations? And operations is the ongoing routine activities that are involved in keeping an organization going, or the lights on, as I like to say. So if we think about that, a really great quote that I like to think about is operations keeps the lights on. Strategy provides a light at the end of the tunnel, but project management is the train engine that moves the organization forward. Does that make sense? So projects are temporary, right? You've got to, you got to start, you've got to finish, you've got an end goal, right? Strategy is kind of that, which way are you going? And then the project management and the operations is keeping the lights on, the day-to-day activities. So the great example I give for operations versus project is talking about, for example, invoicing. A lot of people say like, oh, we do invoicing, it's temporary, we do it once a month and everything, that must be a project. No, that is operations. That's a reoccurring routine activity that you do. It just because you do it at a specific time in the month doesn't make it a project. The unique component of that product, service, or result versus that repeating. All right, so when we think about project management, there's actually several different flavors of project management, and I'm just calling out kind of three of those main ones. So project management, the way I think of it is oftentimes is like, it's a toolkit. It's all of these different skills, tools, techniques that you're using to get to the project goal, to get to the end goal. But there's different flavors of project management. So the three big ones, IT, software, development. IT framework is actually where my primary experience in, and I have about 10 years of project management experience in software development and IT process improvement. But there's also engineering, and also like R&D engineering is another one, and then construction. And the reason why this is important is because when you're talking to a project manager, even if they are a more formal project manager and use the lingo, their experience is very different between these different types of project management. When I talk about project management, I want to give just like a really quick history here. My goal for this webinar is to get to the point where we're providing you tools, talking about some of the pain points of project management and how you can overcome them. But I do want to ground you in this idea that project management has existed forever, right? When we think about the Egyptian pyramids, the Great Wall of China, those are pretty significant big projects. But in terms of the actual discipline of project management, it's actually been only in the last century or so that we've really formalized the practices. The Gantt chart was kind of one of the big first inventions or codifying of project management, critical path method. I don't want to get too much into it, but it's only been about 20 years, if you've heard the buzzword agile, that project style was codified. And then more recently, we've been talking a lot about like lean startup, et cetera. The point is that project management is a constantly evolving discipline, just like management and all these other components. But project managers as an actual job title and a role independent of a skill, I would say really has only come about in the last less than 50 years. So we're still learning a lot. For project management, there's two core umbrellas of methodologies. There's the waterfall, more traditional, that you might kind of think the biggest areas for this is PMBOK or the Project Management Institute. And they've broken it down into kind of 5 phases. So initiation, plan, execute, monitor, and control. These are probably like the best known ways of breaking down project management in a traditional sense. And then the umbrella of agile that has a lot of different flavors, and this concept of an iterative approach where your plan, create, review, release in a constant cycle over the course of the project. Lots of different players in the space of project management. I mentioned Project Management Institute. SAFe is another one. If you've heard Six Sigma Lean, you've heard of Scrum, you've heard of Prince2. There's a lot of different spaces in here, but the real core of this is no matter how good the team or how efficient the methodology, if you're not solving the right problem, the project is going to fail. And so what I want to talk about today is about project management, and I don't want it to be intimidating or overwhelming. What I'm looking to do is come out of today feeling like, you know what, I get it. I know I can move forward. I can add value to my team. Here are some tools that we can use to make sure that we're on the right track. So I'm going to break down project management a little bit less granularly than some. I don't want you to feel like you have to have these big, heavy processes in order to be able to use project management toolkit successfully. I don't feel like in order to be a successful project manager or to manage a project for your team, or even be a project member, you have to have tons of documentations and tons of toll gates and goals and milestones. That's not the point. The point is getting from point A to point B successfully and transitioning that into an operations role. So for today, we're going to be talking about project management, and there is a problem, there is a pain point, there is something going on that you're looking to solve. And so the point is that there's a pain point or a problem, and that the next thing you need to do is articulate the goal of what you are trying to accomplish. Now, in more formal project management in heavier, larger organizations, you might have heard of something called a project charter. You might have business case templates. There's a lot of different components that are associated with this, but at the core, you have a problem and you are trying to articulate the goal and you're trying to define a solution. All right. So after you've identified the problem, whether an individual or a team of people, and then you've articulated the goal, we're going to be talking about some of the strategies of how we articulate that goal correctly. We need to identify who can help us actually dig in and solve this problem. And so those are oftentimes called stakeholders, right? Or team members. It's not just the people that can actually help, but it's also the people that are going to be impacted by whatever you're working on. The next phase is really defining what the solution is. You might have heard that called requirements, business requirements, functional requirements. What does the solution look like? What does success look like? And then breaking up that solution into logical pieces. In project management lingo, you can oftentimes hear this called like a work breakdown structure or a WBS, but really it's this concept of you have this big component and you need to break it down into logical pieces. Okay, we'll go through a couple of examples of that. Up here, you have these kind of core phases that I mentioned in the traditional water flow. So initiation, intake process, the planning of how you're going to address this, the actual execution and monitoring and controlling, and then closing. So these are kind of the high level phases, and these are the components or activities that you're doing within the phases. So when you break up the solution into logical pieces, or you break down the work, you then need to go ahead and build the solution, test to make sure the solution is meeting those requirements, and then also confirming that the solution is meeting your goal, right? So there's a difference between making sure that the solution is meeting the individual functional requirements and determining that what you're building is actually meeting what the original goal was. One of the hugest pain points that I see for clients of all sizes, anywhere from small nonprofits all the way up to Fortune 200 companies, is that you have an entire project team working on executing, and none of them can actually articulate what the goal of what they're doing is. They only have their piece of the puzzle. They don't actually know why this project is occurring. So we're going to be talking about how important it is that every single member of the team, anyone that's a stakeholder of this project, an end user, actually is able to understand why you're doing what you're doing and what you want the end result to be. Okay. So once you've built something and you've tested it and confirmed, you know what, yep, this does meet the goal, this is great, and oftentimes a big bulk of the project, one of the next huge pain points that a lot of my clients have and a lot of teams across, across functionally have is, okay, we built it, how do we actually adopt it or launch it? One of the big pain points and one of the things I work with a lot of project managers on is that a project doesn't actually end at go live. A project ends when the project, there's a great quote that I didn't actually include it in this deck, but a project ends when the project starts working for you instead of you working for the project. And so how do we transition the project? How do we have it go live? How do we have it go live and then transition from a project, a temporary endeavor, into day-to-day operations and support? And how do we get the project team cleanly transitioned off of this effort onto a different project or multiple projects as it may be? And that requires a variety of different activities, and you can sum them up in adoption, it's like what I like, but really it is cutover planning, moving from the existing system, the existing process, the existing set of tools over to the new one. In software project management and IT project management, that oftentimes has like a data component, it has a content component, it has a communication piece in terms of communicating with your end users, anyone that's going to be using this new process or tool. There's training associated if there's a new process or a new tool that you need to be made aware of. And then there is this a really important piece, I've labeled it here in the rocket, is as buy-in, the fire. How do you make sure that your users are bought into, or your team is bought into this project and actually wants to adopt it and can champion it? Because if you don't have both that carrot and the stick, you oftentimes are not going to maximize the value of your project and you're not going to meet the goal, because you can build it, but they won't necessarily come. So we're going to be talking about some of the communication methodologies and some of the tools we use to make sure that our team is bought into a project and actually willing to adopt it, so that when we launch the solution, it's not success for a point in time, but it's actually ongoing. So one of the values at Echo Consulting I like to talk about, which is you want to build self-sufficiency, not dependency. One of the key pain points in project management is you have this great team that's building, working on it, they're bought in, they're super excited. Then they bring in everyone else that hasn't been part of the project team, and they just assume like, oh, hey, they know everything. We're telling them they're going to totally love it, but they didn't have time to actually buy into it. And when you launch the solution, then the transition to operations and support isn't smooth. What happens is everyone keeps going back to that same project team, asking the same questions because they haven't had the time to really adopt it fully. So we'll be talking about some of the strategies of how we can foster buy-in. This is a very high level process flow of a project, and there's lots of different options. I call it Googleability, but you can Google online and you will see, if you look at the PMBOK, the Project Management Book of Knowledge, I think it's in its 7th edition now, if I remember correctly. They have this broken down into 55 plus different deliverables that you break down. They have templates online depending on what you're looking for. What I want to make sure you understand is that project management should fit your organization and your team. What you don't want to do is have all of these processes and big heavy deliverables and spend so much time focused on specific activities that you're not, you're missing the actual goal of the project. I'm going to take a breath here. Any questions on this high level flow? All righty. Plans are only good intentions until they immediately degenerate into hard work. All right. So I'm going to just mention right now, we're not going into any specific project planning tools right now. There are literally hundreds of different project planning tools, from free all the way up to enterprise level. I'm mentioning a couple of here: Trello, ClickUp, Teamwork. These are what I tend to think of as more startup or small company, small team tools that do have free versions. You've kind of got this mid-market for a little bit larger, more complicated projects that do have dependencies and some other great automation functionality. And then you have what's considered typically a more enterprise level and oftentimes more technical tools that are typically more expensive. So Jira or Atlassian is probably one of the most popular Reich and Microsoft project. So these are some of the project planning tools, but when it comes down to it, it's not the tool, it's the process. Tools are just there to help you go from point A to point B, to make your life easier, less manual. But really it is understanding the goal and understanding the process underneath it. Despite the history of project management and projects in general, 1 in 6 projects still fail. And that comes from Gartner to 2020 numbers, but there's a lot of different numbers in terms of projects failing. For IT specific projects, they're saying that the number is actually 70%, I believe, is what was released by PlanView. And oftentimes IT projects, when we define failure or projects in general, what I like to remind everyone is that failure is not only a project doesn't go live or a project doesn't make it to completion. A failure can also be that it is so over budget, 200% over budget, twice the budget, or that the timing of it, maybe the project was supposed to happen in the next 3 months or 6 months in order to get market advantage for your team. But instead it ends up being an extra 3 months or an extra year or something like that. Project failure is not just the failure to go live or being canceled. Project failure is also not meeting the goal of the project. And that goal might have that budget and timing associated with it. Common project challenges. If you have been part of a project, these are probably very familiar to you already, but these are kind of those common project challenges that that constantly come up in themes, and these are often the times also that people are bringing in project management consultants. So lack of strategic alignment. So this concept that what is the priority of this project or this work versus that work? And this isn't only like between this project and this project. This is, I'm a full-time operations manager or customer service manager or marketing manager, or I'm a full-time, SEO lead or something like that, and you also want me to do this project above and beyond. How do I balance my operational, like my day-to-day job, with these strategic goals and projects that my organization wants to complete in order to stay competitive? So this lack of strategic alignment and honestly communication of those strategies and priorities is something that a lot of organizations struggle with. Missing requirements or stakeholders. So what oftentimes happens in a project is you'll get to, oftentimes, honestly, it comes down to you're actually testing it with end users, or you're actually kind of finally seeing what the output is. And then someone says, well, wait a second, what about this? What about this person that wasn't even aware? What about this team that this is going to impact and you haven't communicated with yet? So missing requirements that the process or the tool needs to have, or missing people or teammates that are going to be impacted by this until very late. And what happens when you're missing requirements or missing stakeholders, people that are impacted, the longer they miss out, the more expensive it tends to be to include them in the project. So making sure that you're spending time early enough in to make sure that you have all of the requirements and all of the people impacted is critical to avoiding late in the game changes that can be very expensive and disheartening for the project team and for the company. Lack of visibility, and this goes in both directions. So this goes in people asking, the project manager or the operational manager, what's the status of this project? And that can be coming down from an executive leader, strategic, senior leader, or that can be coming up from an individual task, someone that has a task or an activity for the project that just hasn't heard recently. Well, oh wait, was it delayed? Was I still supposed to do this? When was I supposed to do this? So lack of the visibility, not knowing what the status of a project is. This gets even more complicated as there are more and more projects. And in project management, we call those portfolios or programs. But it's this idea that most organizations don't just have one project, they actually have a series of different projects. And that some projects might be small, quick, couple of months long or something like that, maybe a few team members, and other projects that can be much larger and have more tentacles and impacts in the organization that could be much longer. So like working on like an ERP replatform or something like that, where every single area of the business is impacted by that. Don't mind the baby in the background. All right, so that's lack of visibility, again, coming from the senior leaders as well as coming down from the people that are actually supposed to be executing on the work. Lack of transparency. So how did we miss this? How does this person not know about this? It's very similar to this missing requirements and stakeholders, but lack of transparency. This oftentimes comes into play as well with the strategic alignment where something changed in the business. And COVID has provided so many great examples of this, to be honest, which is something changed, but that didn't get communicated either to the project team or to someone on the project team or to that leader. And we end up missing something, right? And then lack of ownership or accountability. Have you ever been in a meeting? Have you ever been in something where you have this meeting and then you come out of the meeting and who actually owns it? Who is supposed to execute that action item? So that lack of visibility of who's basically responsibilities, roles and responsibilities within the project, and making sure that the right people own the right things. Any other common project challenges or challenges that you might be undergoing right now that you want to call out? Another big one that oftentimes comes up is resourcing availability. So making sure that the people that are on the project actually have the capacity to be on the project. So that was the example of, the prioritization, especially with people that are in both operational roles as well as project manager role, as well as project team members. And again, in the IT organization, this can be especially difficult if there are very specifically marketing, IT, a lot of different parts of the organization. There can be specific people or subject matter experts that are assigned to multiple different projects, and making sure that they have capacity and know which project and when they should be working on. You may or may not have heard of the triple constraint for project management. It's a little bit dated now, but I like to call it out in my intro to project management course. So it's this concept that a project has a scope, a specific end goal or amount of work that is expected to be with it, deliverables. There's an amount of time, there's a schedule, it's time boxed, there's a start and an end date goal, and then there's a cost associated with it. And that's not just funding. So a lot of projects do have a cost component in terms of specific budget that's allocated for either purchasing a tool or consulting experience or something like that. But cost should also be, even if you're on an internal project and you're using all internal resources and you're doing a process improvement, be aware that people's time costs money too, right? So tracking the number of hours that you're dedicating to this initiative. And all of this impacts the quality, right? Now, the triple constraint triangle is this concept that if one of these items change, if scope, cost, or time changes, other things change too, not just one of them. So I like to do a really quick visual, which is like, okay, if the time changes or the cost changes, right, the scope has to decrease. So if you've decreased the time or decreased the cost, then the scope needs to be less, right? And so you can see that the area here is smaller than the area here. Okay. Any questions? This is a very, very quick intro. I want to get into the tools next. So triple constraint, cost, time, and scope. All right, so we talked through the process early, identifying the problem, articulating a goal, building the solution, testing, adoption. What I want to talk about is these key pain points that we just discussed and what tools we'll be talking about today. So we're going to be talking about setting SMART goals, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. We're going to be talking about defining roles and responsibilities and using a tool or technique called the RACI or RASCI matrix. And then we'll be talking about a communication plan and the importance of a democratized communication plan and how to track decisions, action items, change requests, and upcoming milestones in a very easy to use tool that can be used in a quick grid. And then we'll be talking a little bit about risk management and transparency of risks and how to roll those up. And then last, for the lack of ownership, we'll be talking about a governance plan, which is really this transition from project operations and how you govern after you've gone live. So SMART goals, who here has heard of a SMART goal before? Anyone? All right, so SMART goals, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. We're going to go through an example of that today. So I gave an example of a goal, which is, hey, I want to grow my network. Well, that's great. What does that mean? So another way to say this, and this would be a SMART goal, is I want to grow my network in Vermont by 10 quality new professional contacts this quarter, averaging at least 1 lunch or coffee in-person meetup per week and 2 larger networking events per month. Wow, that would be nice. This must be pre-COVID, obviously. So if I think about this, I'm specific. I want to grow my network in Vermont, and I want professional contacts, not just my kids' playmates, parents. I want it to be measurable, so I have specific targets. I want 10 contacts. I'm going to try to do that with like 1 lunch, 2 networking events. Attainable and achievable, so I'm going to plan for how I'm going to get to that 10 contacts, right, with that 1 lunch and 2 networking events. It's relevant. This is something that I've missed in my SMART goal, which is, why am I growing my network? Why is this important to me right now? And then timely, time bound. I'm specifically saying that I'm focused on this number for this quarter. One of the pieces I want to mention here is that oftentimes very early on in the project, whether you're doing a business case or you're making a pitch to your manager that you need this new tool or this new, this new project for whatever reason, people feel like they don't have enough information and they feel a little bit insecure in providing this level of detail because they're like, well, I don't know if 10 contacts is enough. I don't know if 1 lunch or 2 networking events is enough or something like that, right? Oftentimes what happens, and what I like to talk to my clients about, is trying to avoid what we call analysis paralysis, spending so much time researching and like really digging in here, building really complex business cases or writing a 5-page project charter on something when you don't have all the information, but instead doing something called progressive elaboration, which is, let's put it down, let's put a target, let's have something to shoot for, and then understand that we can edit it and change it as we go to make sure that it's still meeting what our goals are. So avoiding having anything documented, avoiding having a clear goal or target makes you less likely to succeed. But being able to change that as you go and have change management process and, update it and communicate it out is a way that we can, start from somewhere, have a clear goal in mind, but then continue to improve as you go. Any questions or examples of SMART goals? You guys use SMART goals in your business now. So this idea that you need to be more specific and measurable. KPIs is a good example. Oftentimes people's data maybe isn't, thanks Kelly. So maybe sometimes people's data is not mature enough or is not clean enough, and people feel uncomfortable putting in, a specific key performance indicator because they're like, wow, we really don't have the data to support that, or that data is not accurate or something like that. What I like to encourage people is try to do what you can with the data that you have. You can make some assumptions, right? But not measuring anything is going to, detract from it. You can improve your data over time. That is okay. But not having a target, not having everyone know kind of what the goal of it is, really detracts from the project as a whole. The next piece we're going to be talking about is a tool called Rasky. You might have also seen this as RACY. And so this is the concept of breaking it down and talking about the roles and responsibilities for different stakeholders on your project team, for different team members. And there are different roles and responsibilities. So there's responsible, accountable, consulted, supportive, and informed. So if we think about a project level, assuming you have a little bit of a larger project and you have a project manager that is responsible for the project, making sure that the train engine keeps moving. You have someone that is accountable right? Someone that is oftentimes the person that reports out to senior leadership. Maybe they sit on the senior leadership team. This is the person oftentimes that signs the budget, if you want to think about it that way. So there's a project sponsor. There's someone that's consulted. So in this example, I've used like the director of sales. Maybe we're implementing a CRM. Let's assume we're doing a client relationship manager, some sort of contact system for the sales team. There's people that are consulted. So like the regional sales director, but maybe they don't actually sit on the project team. They're not hands on the keyboard, actually completing an event or completing an activity, but there's someone that you need to consult because they have expertise that no one else on the team has. This person that's consulted is oftentimes very constrained from a time capacity standpoint. There's people that are supportive. These are in most cases the people that are the members of the team members, the people that are going to be the hands on the keyboard, make the changes, do the testing, create any documentation, SOPs or things like that that need to happen. And then you have people that are informed, and these are oftentimes the end users, the people that need to get trained, the people that are going to be impacted by the change that the project is bringing about. They may not need to be informed on a weekly basis or even bi-weekly basis, but they do need to be informed of the end result. They're most likely the people that are going to be trained and need to know about when this is going live and things like that. So in this example, the sales team, leadership team, client service team, marketing team, finance team, this would be an example of who might need to be informed if you're making a change to the CRM. This is a RASCI from a project level. This is extremely high level. The next level down would be to actually start breaking out the team members and thinking about the different activities that you have to do for the project. So in this example, there's a requirements document. Maybe there's a contract with the vendor that needs to be addressed. Maybe there's a user experience and there's the building and the testing and then the actual training, right? And so what I've done is I've said, okay, Victor is accountable for the document. He's responsible for the contract, so he's going to be the one that's going to be doing any vendor negotiations and reading through the contract and marking it up. And he's accountable for the user experience and build, etc. So he's most likely a budget owner, a sponsor. Then you have Jean, who's responsible for the requirements document. Maybe she's the business analyst on this, or maybe she's the subject matter expert on the team. She's supporting the contract because she has some technical expertise here that needs to be addressed and make sure the requirements are addressed in the contract, but she's not actually responsible for it. She's supporting something in the contract. Does this make sense? So you can put the person as a column, as many team members. If you don't have specific team members, you could just put their role down. This can be a really useful exercise for teams that are just kind of fleshing out their project process, to think about who the stakeholders are and what they're going to be responsible for within the project. Okay. Any questions here? Has anyone ever used a RASCI or a RACI? Quiet, guys. All right, so we're down two tools so far. So we've done the SMART goals, we've done the RASCI. These are the high-level roles and responsibilities. The next thing up is what I call a project log. If you are a project manager, you have experience with, you've done this project management training before, you may have been told about a risk log and a change log and an issue log and action item log. I find that in most situations, it's easiest to have what I call a project log, which keeps all of your risks, issues, action items, decisions, and changes all in one place, and you just categorize this. So if you have a project management tool, great, but if you just need a grid or a table, you can do that here as well and be able to filter it based on that. These are the most basic columns that I recommend. Mine have quite a few more, but a description of what it is, what type it is it a risk, issue, action, decision, or change, who the owner is, who is currently owning, responsible for this item, what's the status, is it new, are you adding to it, is it open or in progress, or is it closed or completed? what the priority of it is, what is the estimated time of arrival. You could also say the due date, for example, any notes, and then also I like to keep track of when it was first added to the log. There's a lot of other pieces here that you could add, but this is the very basic version. And one of the things I just want to call out now is risk versus issue. So risk is something that has the potential to have a negative or positive impact, whereas an issue is something that is having an impact on your ability to deliver the result that you're looking for. So oftentimes the goal is to identify those risks with your team, and to come up with mitigation strategies or ideas of how you might address it if it becomes an issue, if it actually comes into play and it is affecting your ability to deliver. One of the things I work with a lot of my teams on is making sure that you actually understand what those risks are and you spend time as a team being proactive and thinking about all the things that could go wrong or right, but all those things, and having that visibility of those risks and having that kind of pre-plan options. One of the things you know about a project is that things are always going to change, right? As a project manager, things are always going to be changing, and you have to be able to kind of roll with the punches and jump on things as things escalate. But spending that time to proactively think about what those changes might happen, especially when you have a team that all have different perspectives and experiences. Maybe they've gone through a CRM platform upgrade before. Maybe they've built an e-commerce site with a different company and changed over. They all have different perspectives that as a project manager, as a project leader, your goal is to make them comfortable enough to call out those risks. Too often as project managers, we put out a plan and what we just basically say is we're looking for more of like an opt-in, which is a, hey guys, like, do you see anything wrong with this plan? Instead of changing the question up and saying, hey, tell me what's not going to work about this plan. Putting it on them to actually say, don't just look at it with rosy glasses, all things being equal, all things being perfect, this is the best case happy path. Take the moment to take a step back and look at all the ways that this could go wrong so that you have the information that you need to be proactive and make plans for it and be prepared. So, sorry, that's just my pitch. Risk management and transparency of those risks. A lot of times people feel uncomfortable calling out why something could be wrong because they feel like they're going to be considered a no person or something like that. But really making sure that your team is comfortable calling out those risks is really critical to project success. Making sure you're keeping track of action items from any meeting that you have, from any documentation, anything that needs to be brought out, especially things that are outside of your team that you need to keep track of. Marking down the decisions, as I mentioned, things change. That is okay, but making sure that you are documenting those decisions so you understand why that change occurred, when it occurred, and make sure that everyone has visibility on that change. And then actual change request. Change management is a really important component of project management. It does not have to be a huge big deal. Some organizations, again, I work with very large organizations that have very specific change management processes with change orders and have to go up for document approval. And I've had change requests for hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? So we're talking bigger than a lot of projects. And that's fine. But having change management, even from a very small team for a very small project, is still really important. And it's going to help you with adoption and informing as things change. So I highly recommend documenting decisions and change requests. It doesn't have to be 5 different documents for risk management and change management. It can all be one. So don't overcomplicate it. Keep it simple. You may have heard form, storm, norm. It's a very similar concept. Echo made a marketing version of it, basically, I'll be honest here. So it's this concept of engaging new stakeholders, that there's originally conflict, and then you're harmonizing that view and then how to change it to ownership. So identifying who the stakeholders are, who's going to be impacted, making sure we're articulating goals all together, There is going to be conflict. There's going to be conflicting priorities between teams, especially between individual goals, different visions, right? Making sure that everyone is able to articulate their vision, and then how to harmonize. And whether you call this horse trading or not, it's compromising, negotiating, trade-offs, clarify that shared vision that everyone can get behind. Bezos has a great quote that he talks about, which is, disagree and then commit. So it's not that everyone's always going to have the same perspective and everyone's going to love what ends up results, but you can disagree in the team, you can clarify that, but then you need to commit to the project success and move forward. I told you so's really doesn't help anyone. But make sure that you're bringing in the right people in the conversation so that they're not left out and they don't get to have this component of conflict and harmonize. And then owning, how do you have that team, aligned, buy-in, governance, and then they can bring it out. So one of the things I work a lot with on teams is building champions, right? Within, especially when you're doing a cross-functional project where you have multiple different departments or teams or silos. How do you build champions within each of the different teams? Because when people have an issue with something or a question about a new process, they're going to be much more comfortable going to someone within their team that they trust, that they know understands their role, versus a project team, which they may or may not understand like how much they really grasp their specific issue. So trying to build champions in each team that is impacted. I continue to go really fast because I've got a ton of content, guys. So of all the things I've done, the most vital is coordinating the talents of those who work for us and pointing them towards a certain goal. So project management is a very exciting um, job. If you are considering project management, I am the VP of Communications at the Project Management Institute for Champlain Valley. So that's the local Vermont and upstate New York chapter, but you might have a chapter local to you. Project Management Institute, it provides a lot of different training as well as certification for project managers, and they are branching out more into citizen development as well as transformational and organizational management leadership as well. One of the pieces that I work with on my client is communication methods and the importance of having equitable communication and representation. So some of the types of communication you might be used to are meetings, instant messaging, and email. And what you may notice is that there are some more vocal members of your team that tend to have more representation. There's also says like the loudest person or the squeakiest wheel or last in, last out. You might have some of these difficulties. But especially, and again, my background is primarily in that software development and software implementation side of things. I work with a lot of developers or more technical individuals that might be more, not all, but might be more introverted, and they have very valid and important perspectives that it's important to draw out. So what are some of the ways that you can work with your team to make sure that you have better representation across the continuum of very vocal members all the way down to quieter members? And so some of those things are scrums. But scrums are stand-ups where everyone is requested to provide an update. So it's a round robin. So it's not a matter of just if you raise your hand, if you have something to say, but instead it is everyone has something that they contribute. Oftentimes it can be a one-on-one weekly meeting. If you are a manager or a project manager of a specific team member that has a lot going on, that one-on-one check-in specific to their issues, their concerns, and that can be a great way to glean new risks and deal with any kind of action items that aren't being taken care of on a timely basis. I use a lot of surveys or anonymous voting. I use a lot with my team to try to make sure that everyone is responding, and then use the output of these surveys and anonymous voting and prioritization to start the meeting from a point of data. And then identify what those outliers are. So I highly recommend, there's a lot of free tools for surveys and voting and things like that. We just did what did we do, Melissa? We just did what's called a pre-mortem exercise. So it's where you're focusing on identifying all the risks for a big project, especially for big projects early on. And we had over 44 different participants, and it's really hard to get feedback when you get 44 different people, right? So some of the things we did is we did anonymous voting where everyone was one, either putting a sticky note or an idea in, or they were voting on specific ideas, then we start from a point of the data, look for the outliers, and that's kind of where we dug in, and that really fostered great communication across. And then also breaking it down, there were 44 different users, but we had different roles and responsibilities and breakout rooms and things like that. So as a project manager, making sure that your meetings are structured in a way that you can meet your goals, and that there's no kind of shocking new information that's coming out, is usually a good idea. So you can see that the more vocal people still have more representation usually, but it's a lot more equitable than some of the typical communication methods. This is just an example of a governance plan. You may have something like this in play, but not formalized. So this is the idea that if you're changing a process, you're changing a tool, you're changing a platform, you need to plan for what that's going to look like, not just at go live and immediately after in hypercare, kind of that period where everyone's focused on it because there's been a change, but what that looks like long term. So it's really important. I call it the intake process, so that if there's training or questions, if there's a defect, if people are having permission issues, if people have an idea or a request for a change, too often the project team and project managers are like, we're at the end of the game, we're just trying to go live, like I don't have time for that, like we already thought of that. Being able to document and capture those ideas when they are naturally being given by the users that are seeing something for the first time is a huge value. You lose out so much if you are so focused just on go live and you're not capturing this. So having an intake form or an intake process, comment box, etc., your organization might have this already. If not, standing up a really quick version, even just like a Microsoft form, if you're Microsoft Shop survey, whatever that looks like for you, trying to capture that information, have it be reviewed, understand who is responsible for reviewing it, understanding how quickly that review needs to happen. So you're setting the expectations with the users or the people that are submitting this of when they should expect to hear back. Who's in charge of the governance? It shouldn't just be the project manager, the project team going forward. You need to bring in some fresh blood, some new perspectives in here, and then prioritizing those requests. So either, you know what, nope, we can't do that idea right now. It's, it's not the right thing. That needs to get communicated back, or yeah, we can do that at some point, but not quite yet. Let's put that on our roadmap. Or yes, this is something that either needs to get done immediately, called a hot fix oftentimes in tech terms, right? Or yes, it's approved, but it's going to take a little while. We have to build, test, and get that out on a scheduled basis, like, hey, this is when this is going to happen. So this is an example of a governance plan for a software platform rollout of how to manage that. So I wanted to make sure we had 10 minutes left to answer any questions, go back through anything. So again, this deck is going to be sent out along with these tools, as well as a survey to see any feedback on this webinar, anything we moved too quickly through, or something you were expecting to see that we didn't. We have upcoming webinars, not with intro, but we'll actually be talking about project portfolio management solution in Smartsheet that Echo Consulting built. We'll be talking about managing conflicting priorities, some of the strategy tools and tactics to overcome those conflicting priorities. We also have a mailing list. We send out tips and tools, or you're welcome to follow us on LinkedIn. Here's some contact information as well. Any questions today? Anyone want to share any difficulties they're having right now, which made you attend an Intro to Project Management webinar? It's all right. You guys are quiet. Any chats, Melissa? Super helpful. Okay, well, if you guys don't have questions, I have a couple of bonus slides on work breakdown structures. You're welcome to jump off if you need 10 minutes before your next meeting. But I prepared for a quiet group. So one of the other webinars that I've given pretty frequently and has gotten great results is is this concept of time estimation. And so what I want to do is again, bring us back to project management, this idea that everyone is a project manager, everyone manages a project. If you have ever bought a house, if you have rented or moved to a new apartment, if you have decided what college to go to or what town to move to, these are all ideas of projects, not in the workplace, but like personal projects that we manage, but we don't necessarily think that we are managing a project at the time. So I'm just going to walk through a really quick example of buying a house. So if I'm buying a house, I need to find a house that I want to buy and get under contract, right? If I already have a house, I need to sell that house potentially, right? And then I need to figure out how to move in between houses. That is an extremely high level articulation of buying a house and how that is a project, right? But in terms of project management, we need to build it, we need to break this down into a more granular level. The key concept that I want to bring forward here is this concept of effort versus duration. And this is a key point of confusion when you start to make a plan as a project manager about whether you are talking in time units in terms of the amount of time it's going to take to work on something to get it done versus the duration that it's going to take, the calendar time over which work occurs. So as I was talking about in an example earlier, right? You might be in operations, maybe you're a customer service manager, for example, but you've been brought in to support a new client relationship manager, new CRM, right? But you have a full-time job, you're managing people, you're doing these other things. So you don't have 8 hours a day to be working on this other project. You might have an hour a week or 2 hours a week. So it's really important when you're creating a plan to be clear as a project manager, the difference between the amount of time something's going to take someone to complete versus the actual duration that that work is going to occur. And you want to try to pick one of those for when you're getting estimates from your team. So a work breakdown structure that I mentioned earlier is this hierarchical decomposition of work. So blah, blah, blah. Basically, you take those really high level tasks we talked about and you break them down into a more granular level. So a house, right? When you're moving into a new house, you have lots of different things you have to figure out, right? You have to figure out your family, your pets, all these different things that you need to pack up. And you're not going to pack your, for example, bed or your couch up first because you're still using that. But you might, for example, start packing up your pictures or your books or things that you don't use as often. Right? When you're moving into a new house, first you need to break down all the different chunks of work, but then you start to think about in what order am I going to do these tasks so that it is most efficient and makes the most sense and that I get it done. When you are buying a new house and you're talking about these different components, the first thing you want to do is break down the work and not worry about the schedule. Oftentimes people will try to break down the work and put it in order at the same time, and they miss out on the work. First, focus on here are all the different things I need to do, then reordering how to do the work in terms of what comes first. Don't try to do both things at the same time. Start with a list. Keep it simple. Here are all the things I need to do. So breaking it down in a work breakdown structure, this is an example. So I pre-approval for funding, I need to find a house and then I need to actually get under contract. The current house needs to be ready for sale. I need to find a buyer for my current house and I need to pack up. I need to sell the house and buy the house. And wow, that is, a lot of different tasks here. There's inspections, utilities to be switched. We got to clean the new house, clean the old house. And then you might want moving company quotes or moving coordination. Maybe you have a couple of friends that are going to help you, right? Now, the way that I organize this and break it down is different than how Nathan's going to break it down or how Stephanie is going to break it down, right? So everyone is going to break this down a little bit differently. As a project manager, your project plan is your tool. It should make sense to you. Did you have a question, Nathan? No. Okay. So, when you're breaking down the work, you want this to be logical to you and to your team. But again, it doesn't need to be broken down in terms of order, in terms of this happens and then this happens, right? Focus on the work chunks first and then actually moving them out. So if you are in person for your team, we oftentimes used to do the sticky note exercise. There's virtual sticky note exercises too, but it's this idea that you can move things in order for duration after you have the chunks of work identified. Oh, all right. I guess I didn't give as many bonus concepts as I thought I was going to. Well, there's a whole nother presentation on tips and techniques for how to estimate work, especially if your team doesn't want to give you an estimate. If you're working with developers, you're working with technical experts, engineers, they tend to say, I don't have enough information until very far along. So tips and techniques of how to get estimates out for your team in terms of how long something's going to take. And then we have a whole nother thing on work breakdown structures and how to actually get those into project tools. So if you're interested in more information, don't hesitate to reach out. Always happy to help. Again, anyone can be a project manager, use these project management tools. The biggest thing is focusing on project management that fits your organization, right? I would say